Jyoti, really good to meet you.
Yeah, very nice to meet you.
Let's go right from the top. What is Harness? I know you've been around for 4 or 5 years now, and you're growing very, very strongly. But I imagine there's still people out there who haven't heard of Harness. So tell us what the company does and the problem space it's trying to attack.
Sure. Harness is a platform for automating every part of software delivery process. So whether it's CI, CD, feature flags, resiliency testing, cost management, security, governance, everything that happens when a developer commits code to, and the code goes into production, all the toil that happens, that's what Harness is simplifying through fully automated pipelines, bringing AI native interfaces to that process, leveraging AI and data to automate a lot of the decision making around those.
What sort of solutions are you typically replacing when you go in and you start working with a large bank, for example? Is it homegrown, Jenkins? Is it GitHub Actions? What sort of stuff are you replacing?
All of them, but homegrown is a big part of it. Historically, there were not really good platforms for to do a software delivery pipeline properly. So people built homegrown systems. People built homegrown systems on top of Jenkins. People built homegrown systems on something like a GitHub Actions, which is a CI. But then if you have to do the deployment, automation, security, governance, then you build your homegrown scripting on top of that. So what we typically see is like homegrown things, a lot of scripting, a lot of people have glued things together. You have hundreds of engineers working on maintaining and updating these kind of things, but the developers are all struggling. There's so much toil associated with that, and that's what we are replacing.
I think one of the things that when we talk to CIOs and CTOs, there's a big focus on avoiding vendor lock-in at the moment, and maybe homegrown Jenkins is a janky kind of thing, but people quite like to roll their own stuff at the moment. How do you find the conversations around that space, evolving?
At the end of the day, people want to solve the problems. It's either you build a homegrown system on top of Jenkins, you are still locked into that homegrown system. A vendor is easier to replace. It's a subscription. You may buy for 2 years and you want to swap that out. Let's do that. The approach that we take is you need good solutions. Most companies, the developers are spending about 25-30% of time coding, and then everything happens after coding is where majority of the time goes. So the approach that we take is we'll build the best of breed solutions to solve these problems. The best platform to do deployments, the best platform to do builds, best platform to optimize cost.
You mentioned toil quite a few times. What are, zoom out and tell us, what are the problems developers typically face?
It's almost, I feel there's lack of awareness around it. Let's say you wrote some code, and now after that, you have to deploy the code to production. What are the steps that are needed? Are you spending 4 hours on watching a deployment? Are you running manual steps to do things that could take another 2 hours? Something fails, does it take 2 hours of troubleshooting of it? So that's really is all the toil. Say your compliance teams wants an audit trail of all the changes you made. Does it take you 1 hour of manual work to produce that trail of what things you changed? Do you have to wait for 4 hours for someone to approve something? So you wasted 4 hours waiting. You made a code change and you have to wait for the build to happen. Does it take 1 hour to build, or does it take 10 minutes to build? Because yes, if it's taking 1 hour, there's a context switch at that time. You can't really work. Yeah. All of these things add up. It
sounds like you want to kind of be all things across the developer space. And how have you avoided getting unfocused? I think, when you launch a company, it's really important to have you've got a very clear problem space you're trying to solve. And, you mentioned you've got sort of 14 different modules already, and you're quite a young company. How are you making sure that you don't do lots of things in a sort of fairly mediocre way rather than one thing really, really well? Because you're tackling a lot of problems.
Sure, that's an excellent question. Our vision is that the world needs platform for developers. Developers don't have a good platform to do their job. They have to cobble together so many things. It's been historically very fragmented. Each of the different problems have different products, different startups, different companies to do solving it, whether it's CIs or CD or chaos engineering or cloud cost management, all kind of different things. We are bringing them into one platform. But to address how do we do a great job in each one of those is an organizational model which is very different than what people have done before. We call them startups within a startup. So Harness is a young startup, but inside Harness, when we have 14 modules in our platform, they're all independent startups. And with one goal, they're focused on building the best of breed solution for their problem area. Yeah. So we have a startup for CD, we have a startup for CI, we have a startup for feature flags, we have a startup for each one of these.
As a CEO and as a founder, how do you make sure that those startups within a startup, as you put it, don't turn into stovepipes? How do you make sure they're all communicating with each other and the solutions they're delivering are nicely integrated?
You have to have a shared platform. So in terms of user interface, in terms of the common constructs around, managing users, managing, services, the common entities, etc. And we have designed that very properly. So now you can build these different startups and use cases on top of that. They are very seamlessly integrated in one flow.
If I want to come and buy a Harness solution, do I need to buy it as a cloud native SaaS? Is there an on-prem version? How do I deploy? I know you've got some open source offerings as well. How does that work?
Our primary method is SaaS. So we run in SaaS, it's a SaaS service, it's everything in the cloud. We also have a secure architecture where you have these worker processes called delegates that you run in your own environment.
Okay.
So our SaaS will do the control plane, and then the worker process will do the groundwork. So it's very secure from that sense. We do have a on-premise option for companies who want it. So we have about 10% of our customers who do an on-premise kind of option, mostly government agencies, etc., where they're not comfortable with the cloud.
And is that
option.
containerized or?
It's everything containerized. So when you're running an on-prem, you just bring in a Kubernetes cluster, and we will just run on a Kubernetes cluster.
Talk to me a little bit about you. I mean, you've built one very successful company. You sold it, for a healthy exit to Cisco. What made you want to kind of come back in, start it all over afresh? What motivates you?
The first instinct I had once I sold my first company was to retire, and I tried that. And after 6-7 months, I realized that's not for me. And what my motivation was, I'm a software engineer. I like to build products for software engineering. I was just very bothered by we just don't have a good platform for engineers to do their job.
About a year ago, you bought an open source project called Drone, I believe, which was almost like an open source GitLab or GitHub kind of baby alternative. What are you doing with that? What have you rolled it into? What was the idea there?
So we bought Drone a few years ago in 2020.
Okay.
And Drone was a very popular open source CI project for continuous integration. It was one of the first fully container native, where all the tasks are containerized when you do in a build process. So we brought in the Drone project. The team working on Drone project became part of Harness. They are actually leading some of our big initiatives at Harness now. We built our CI on top of that. So it's the Drone project became the foundation of Harness continuous integration. We got a jump start by doing it, and the Drone project is still actively supporting it, adding more and more capabilities, so that people can get more advantage. We decided to take the Drone project, which is CI, but also create a bigger open source project, a Harness open source. In that Harness open source project, we bring CI, CD, code repo, and a few other DevOps capabilities as one open source download you can get started.
I think there's a lot of folks out there who have been burned by companies using open source as a freemium strategy and then pulling the rug on the license front. I understand why that's been the case, but how committed are you to open source as a company, would you say?
We are very deliberate about what is open source and what is not. But we are very clear, if we make something open source, we are not going to take it back. The change is where the problem is, and we are making choices where we're not making everything open source. As some things are in a license that's a source available kind of license, and some things are in open source license. We want to be very clear with our intention. We want to be very, we don't want to surprise the community. We don't want to surprise the developers who are using or relying on us.
Could you name perhaps some customers publicly? I'm not sure if you're able to tell us run rates publicly and what your future plans are. That'd be great.
Sure. We have about 1,000 customers. A lot of the large enterprises in the industry, large banks like a Citibank, or large airline like United Airlines. So these companies are using us at a massive scale. Citibank would be 15,000-20,000 developers relying on Harness to do all the deployments. For example, United Airlines for about 7,000-8,000 developers using us for all kind of software delivery challenges, CI, CD, feature flags, cloud cost management, etc. We have about 1,000 employees in the company, growing very quickly, building all of these products here. Few $100 million of revenue scale, fast growing business.
This is a naughty question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are you profitable? Or what's the target on the profitability?
Yes, we are not profitable yet because we are investing so much back in the growth. Everything that we earn, we put back in the growth, but we'll be profitable as we build towards being a public company at some point.